Here we go. Hello. Welcome to our third class. You guys have been working hard and it's shown in your work and your great discussion with one another. I appreciate it so much. Wanted to just now dive in to individual exceptionalities, individual disorders. We covered in previously up to now. Um, Different yet alike, identifying the needs of young children with disabilities, developmentally appropriate practice, universal design, and individualized supports and interventions, addressing challenging behavior. And now we are at the place where we're going to really focus on the individual disorders and challenges and disabilities so that hopefully you can gain some knowledge, but to build to the knowledge that you've already gotten through the course, and so that you can implement some good strategies within your classroom. If you see on our matrix, you see that we are looking at autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. Then you're going to be going on to speech and language impairments, visual and hearing impairments, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and then we're just going to do a conclusion. Today, we're going to cover the first three: the autism spectrum and ADHD, the speech and language, and the visual and hearing. And then next, our final class, we will go over physical disabilities. We may do some sensory things and then talk about IDD, individual learning disabilities, and just do a wrap up of our time together. One of the main exceptionalities or disabilities that we see within our classroom is ADHD and autism. Both have a very special place in my heart. I have a grandson with autism, so he brings me great joy. As we begin this particular chapter, what I want you guys to think about is not just what autism is, but also how do I meet the needs of the children within my classroom? As you are thinking about that, I asked my daughter, what would you want early childhood educators to know about your child? And the one thing that she said that stood out was that she wanted you as an educator to know that each child is different and that you really have to alter your interactions with every child to meet their individual needs. Her goal for educators was that they learn to know the child themselves so that they can structure their educational practice around each individual child. So I thought that was a beautiful comment for her to make, that each child is different and that the interventions vary. So I thought, how could I bring that to where you could see it in a really easy way? And so I want you to think about all the people you know with brown hair. Is the brown hair on every person that you know the same color, the same hue, the same thickness? It's not. But yet their hair is brown. And that's the way we want to think about children with autism. Very different, special, and beautiful in their own way. What is autism spectrum disorder? So I have a lot of information on autism, and I actually could most likely talk about autism this entire time. But I think what I wanted to do was just talk about how autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it affects behavior, communication, cognition, and social skills. So when you look at autism, statistically, more boys are identified with autism than girls, and there is no racial or ethnic disparity. So there's a lot of rise in the prevalence of autism, and there's a lot of ideas of why that's occurring. But the reality for you as the education specialist is not to really know why it's occurring, but to know how to interact within your classroom to best meet that child's needs. When you think about autism and you think about the impact that it has on development and learning, you know that there's social communication issues. There's limited interest in repetitive action behaviors, and there is a difficulty functioning in a daily environment. The symptoms usually present before age 2, where a child shows little interest, low eye contact, may not listen when spoken to, difficulty in understanding social cues and facial expressions. Changes in routine upset them very much, and they may engage in repetitive or self-sustaining behaviors. So as you're interacting with the children, I want you to think about very much first then statements. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in this chapter. But remember, we don't diagnose, but what we can do is equip ourselves with interactions that help children succeed. There are many different strategies in the classroom. One of the videos that I liked was called Autism Little Learner Video, where it talks about 3 engagement strategies. And if you have the opportunity, and I'll put it on the message board as well, if you have the opportunity to take it, it's about a 5-minute video, but it's very, very helpful to you as an educator. There are many different things that we can, effective supports that we can have for children on the spectrum. Some effective supports are very clear routines and schedules using visual supports. Here was an example that she gave me of visual supports. This is when you're going to do something with a child. Let's say you're going on a field trip, or you're going to take a child to another classroom for something. To really talk about, okay, we're going to go to the dentist. The first thing we're going to do is check in. Then we're going to wait, so that you can show them this in a very slow, methodical way, so that as they get ready to go into their environment, they do not freak out because they don't know what's coming next. There are a lot of resources online for you. And so we want you to be able to utilize these resources, but you got to go online to find them. Another effective support is knowing your child. So when you get your child in a classroom, you want to ask parents questions like, when my child is happy, they. When my child is sad, they. When my child is nervous, they. The things my child does like, the things my child does not like. You know, you have them describe how their child interacts with other children and adults, how they show affection, how they play with others. Describe your child's favorite thing to do and any special family traditions or customs that may be important to your parents. These are questions that you should ask your parents as the children come in, especially those who are already identified, because you want to be able to support them in the best possible way. And their parents may have techniques and skills that you can use that will benefit you as an educator. You want to make sure that you incorporate sensory breaks in your classroom, that you foster skills through role play or guided activities. You know, the social stories of what comes next or how we may behave, you know, friends don't, no hitting. There are many different social stories that are out there that are very applicable in the early childhood classroom that would be beneficial for your children who are on the spectrum. You want to have individualized instruction as well as encourage communication. There are many other supports that come into your classroom that can help you if you're collaborating with those specific professionals. ADA therapy is one of them. I'm sorry, ABA therapy is one of them. That's applied behavior analysis. And that's where they come in and they help the children break down different activities in smaller steps. They teach them social interactions. They help them master skills, but also help them learn how to interact with the other children around them. And that ABA therapist can come into your classroom if the child is enrolled through the program. There's peer training programs so that there's assistance and modeling of appropriate play. When you're interacting with your children on the spectrum, you want to make sure that you give very clear directions. Don't use too many words. Because when you do, it starts sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher, rah, 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 they're not hearing you. So give very clear directions. First and then. First, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. Or then we can do that. Follow specific routines. Interact with your family. Have an open line of communication and interact with your therapist. Engage the children in social play, learning how to interact appropriately. Teach the other children in the classroom how to have compassion, how to play with children with autism. With my grandson, all the other grandchildren know that, you know, if he gets too excited, he's going to kick you or hit you. And so they'll say, okay, take a breather. I don't want you to kick me. So it's very helpful that the other children can be able to help that child to self-regulate. Give them social jobs. They want to be loved and appreciated and valued. And make sure that you've got lots of visual schedules, which you guys just finished a project on, which are so incredibly important. We want you to set up your classroom where the children in your classroom can succeed. And some of the ways that you can do that is by having a cozy corner. I'm going to put on the message board today NCRLAP's video on cozy corners. Now, it's not specifically for children with exceptionalities, but it is an area where children can learn to defuse and have a moment to themselves. And you can add different items in this area that would then be a wonderful area for your children on the spectrum, or any child with exceptionalities, or even typically developing children. You want to remember to have fidgets and liquid timers and sensory bracelets and stress balls and squeeze stars and tangles, all of these different sensory items that can go into a sensory bin that can be beneficial. Another thing that you can do for children on the spectrum is to have weighted vests or weighted toys that they can hold. My grandson's issue walking down a hallway was he couldn't keep his hands to himself. So he had a weighted backpack, and he put that weighted backpack on, and he could be able to walk down the hallway appropriately without harming or offending other students who are close to him. Heavy work is something that you'd want to speak to an occupational therapist about, some of the different things that you can do. We adopted a child on the spectrum who just absolutely could not walk from one area to another without mass pandemonium. So we actually got him a little tiny Food Lion-like cart buggy, and it had heavy things in it. And anytime that he went anywhere, he pushed that buggy. Or anytime he got really stressed, he pushed the buggy around. So it enabled him to have some of that heavy work and be able then to better self-regulate his body. You want to have calming supports. So hugging and wraps and crash pads, weighted blankets, the turtle light that you can turn on. Lava lights are very beneficial. All of those things bring a child who is way up here down here, which is phenomenal. A lot of children who have autism have a comorbidity of ADHD. And if they do, their challenge, as with children who are on the spectrum, is that just executive functioning. So it's defined as a set of cognitive processes that help us self-regulate. So we can effectively plan, prioritize, and self-regulate to sustain efforts towards long-term goals. So in other words, that executive function is kind of the CEO of your brain, and it goes from helps us to learn how to not just want to do an activity, but to get it done, and to get it done in an effective manner. So when we transition into ADHD, there's a lot of different kinds of ADHD. You've got your inattentive ADHD, your hyperactive impulsive ADHD, and then your combined ADHD. Your inattentive ADHD children are the ones who typically get lost in the crowd, because they're the ones who are sitting off quietly and daydream. So they come across as having learning disabilities, and it may not be learning disabilities. It's just their inability to regulate that serotonin, and so they're off in their own little world. This neurodevelopmental condition is very, very prevalent today. And so we want to remember that as we look at children within our classroom who have ADHD, that they have struggles in many areas. So they've got that response inhibition issue, their working memory issue, their set shifting issue, being able to go from one thing to another, the immediate gratification issue. That's all in the amygdala. That's all, that executive functioning happens up here in the frontal part of the cortex of the brain. And that doesn't really truly fully develop until, somewhere between 26 and 35. And it takes longer for children who have disabilities for that executive functioning to develop. So that's something that you in your classroom want to help promote, is developing of that. Children who have ADHD, the hyperactive, impulsive ADHD, are in constant motion. They're impulsive, they blurt out, they interrupt, they move without thinking. All children with ADHD have emotional regulation issues. Those who are hyperactive and impulsive, you know more about those regulation issues because they're up in your face. Those who are more attentive have these emotional regulation issues, which can really affect their self-esteem and their self-worth, because all of these intensive emotions are there and they're frustrating and they weigh down on children. So what we want to do is help them to be able to process through that. We've got to understand their cues that they give us, as well as making sure that we're teaching them positive social cues, getting along with others. A child who struggles with inattentiveness and distractibility can really have trouble even listening to the directions that you're giving. So it may be that you have noticed that you've got a child in your classroom who has this issue, and you give a direction, but then you ask them to repeat that direction back to you. And that builds their ability to be able to follow directions. When you think about diagnosis, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD, or any of the other disabilities or disorders that we speak of, the first thing you as the the educator needs to do, and we talked about this, I think, in the very first session, is document. Document, document, document. Write down the things that you've noticed. Use your milestone checklist. Make sure that you're aware of where the children are and what they are doing, because that kind of information is going to be given to the parent, and then the parent then can take it to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician would then hopefully send them to a developmental pediatrician or a speech pathologist or, someone who is in that field of diagnoses, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, who are in that field of diagnoses, who can actually give the diagnoses. And then once you go there, then they start having the supports come in. So your occupational therapist, your behavior therapist, your ABA therapist, so that they can come in and help support you. And getting that kind of support, it is a collaboration that makes a village for that child to be able to succeed. So as we think about ADHD, we know it's a dopamine issue. So what I want you to think about with the regular brain is a light bulb, and the switch to turn that light bulb on or off has a dimmer. And you, as a typically developing child, can move that dimmer based on whatever amount of light that you need. With a child who has ADHD, they have that light and it's on, but there's no dimmer. And so they're not able to change their behavior based on whatever the situation is. So for ADHD children, they need a direct payoff. They need a routine and to know what they're going to get and to have that payoff. And that payoff feeds that dopamine, which in fact gives them the ability to do it and get it done. So you see, you get confused on why a child can sit in front of a TV or a video game or build a train set or build a Lego set for hours, but can't sit still for the other times. It's because they're getting their payoff. They're getting that dopamine that they need to feed them there. So therefore they are able to do that. Whereas they may not be able to, pick up the trash and go and put it in the trash can or go to the bathroom and wash their hands because there's no payoff. So it doesn't feed that dopamine. Focus is driven with children by reward. So there's got to be a reward. There's got to be an immediate benefit to them for their bodies to want to do it. And so that is one of the reasons why when you're helping children learn how to regulate and dimmer, you can say, okay, first we're going to do this, but then we're going to do that, so that it helps them to see that there is a reward, and to kind of lay it out there for them. ADHD children's brain is in urgency mode, which means they need that immediate payoff. So their brain hears things louder and stronger. And so we see as educators the inability for them to access, or the inconsistency of accessing all activities, because only certain activities they're all into. There are lots of treatments, and as an educator, it is not your job to diagnose or to, suggest treatments. You would hope that the specialists would do that. But remember that there are non-medical treatments for ADHD. The medical treatment is, of course, medication, which regulates the serotonin and the dopamine and all of that in their brains, the chemicals within their brains. The non-medical treatments are the ones that you would want to use in your classroom, like behavior supports, social skills supports, coaching, nutritional guidance. Now, hopefully your parents have a nutritionist that's working with them, but there's many things that can stimulate or aggravate ADHD. So you want to make sure that what you're feeding the children is not feeding the inability to be able to self-regulate. An example is red dye, sugars, gluten sometimes. So as you look at all of that, you know, providing a parent with those resources is something that you can do. But the real ultimate goal here is to get something working in your classroom for the children that you serve. So as we look at autism and ADHD, we're going to move on now to other types of disabilities. And one of those types is, because it jumped around from our book to how the class was set up, is not laid out in order of the book. So excuse me, I had to find the right tab. Speech and language impairments. So when you think about speech and language impairments, there's a wide, vast world. You've got some children who have selective mutism, who don't speak at all. You've got some children who don't understand speech. You've got some children who, you know, physically cannot speak. So what speech and language impairments are is a combination of articulation disorders, the ability to be able to produce sounds correctly and fluently, the ability to understand spoken words or written language, the ability to use that language, the ability to have pragmatic skills where they understand context, are able to have a conversation, can understand nonverbal cues, social norms, problem solving. There are, in the text, it speaks of articulation disorders like cleft palate. I'm sorry, not like cleft palate. Articulation disorders like not being able to say rabbit and saying wabbit, which a speech therapist can help with that. Stuttering, the apraxia of speech, which is a disorder where the child has a hard time getting their jaw and tongue and lips to move. Some of the different disorders like aphasia and dyslexia, speech sound disorders, language delays, and then specific language impairments are all out there. So when you look at this is a wide variety of different needs when you're looking at the children. As you look at, or just briefly go over some of the reasons for impairments, you've got developmental delays, you've got trauma, you've got neurological disorders, hearing loss, physical abnormalities like cleft palate or tongue-tied. All of those things, or one of those things, could be reasons behind why your child may have a speech disorder. I recently brought a child into my home that came to me, and he was 13 years old, but his speech was on a 5-year-old level because he'd never been spoken to. He'd never had a conversation with an adult. He was just a child who had been forgotten. And so we had to actually teach language and use language and have him repeat back and talk about things. And so as you are so involved in what goes on in your class during the day, remember to slow down and value language and value speech and help children to be able to use whatever speech they have in a way that makes them feel successful. Language and speech impairments affect many things. They affect reading, writing, comprehension, articulation. And so as you have your children in your classroom who have identified speech and language impairments, that's phenomenal because you've already determined, hey, here are the milestones that they're not meeting. They've seen this particular pathologist, and this is what is something that's going to be beneficial for them. Then you have your other children who you just are concerned have speech and language delays. And that's when you're going to use your milestones in all areas of development. The CDC has something called Learn the Signs, Act Early. And you can print that out and hand that to your parents if you are concerned that the children have issues. You're going to suggest to the parents that they speak to a pediatrician for an initial assessment and explain to them that after they speak to the pediatrician, then there would potentially be a speech evaluation by a speech pathologist. And that's only about an hour long. It's not an hour, an hour and 30 minutes long, but they use different testing modules like OWL, and they're able to determine what areas the child is strong or weak on. What I want you to do in your classroom is promote communication skills. Give simple, straightforward directions. Give plenty of time for the children to respond or say something. Be patient. Ask open-ended questions. If you're reading a story about a bear, you may say, what do you think the bear is going to do on the next page? And that's not only building the cognitive ability to hypothesize, but also the language ability to be able to articulate. Use visual aids. Encourage peer interaction and model appropriate language skills. So if you have a child say something that's not completely correct, repeat it back to them correctly. Use technology. Speech-generated apps are great. You can use the AAC, the Augmented and Alternative Communication Boards, tablets. If it's written in the IEP or the FS, the family plan, if it's written in that, then you're going to be able to utilize that, and screen times will not be affected on the rules for screen times in childcare. So, how do you help children with language disabilities or disorders? Like we said, you be patient, you slow down, you talk, you make eye contact, you repeat yourself, you ask the children to repeat what you said. You expand modeling correct verbiage, the correct language. You say it back to them correctly. And then strategies sometimes that I've used is once you start to read, and this is just an example, it's for the older children, but if I put my finger on a word, I might say, oh, I'm going to put my finger here because it helps hold the word down. Because for children with dyslexia, the words jump around visually. So if you use a screen protector or your finger, it helps hold the word down on the page. These are all alternative ways of being successful within your classroom. As we move from speech and language, it's a beautiful way to jump right into vision and hearing impairments. For me, this is one of the hardest because visual impairments describe a wide variety of variations in eye disorders. So you may just have strabismus or muscle weakness or nearsightedness or farsightedness, astigmatism. All of that can be corrected by glasses or surgery, but then you may have a child who cannot see at all. Or who is legally blind, who can only see 2200. So as you're looking at this particular scope, as with the hearing and language disabilities, it is a wide variety of children who potentially could be in your classroom. And the impact on learning for visually impaired children is astronomical because you have to set your classroom up in such a way that they can be successful. You have to make sure that you're helping the children who are visually impaired navigate the environment, detect and avoid hazards, promote their daily activities, to be able to perform their daily activities. You want them to know what the world is like with or without sight. You have to remember that it has a great impact on social development because the children can't see those nonverbal skills. They can't know when it's their turn to talk if they don't have any sight at all. So all of this, as I said, this one is more challenging for me. I have had children who were hearing impaired and who have had cochlear implants. I've had children who have had, and I don't even think we talked about that on hearing impaired, but who have had microphones, the augmented communication where they had mics that I had on. I would wear a mic and it would go into his hearing aid. Keeping hearing aids on children is very challenging. There are lots of resources out there that are available for that, but I've never had a child that was totally blind. And I would love to go into a blind school and actually see how that implements and how they meet the specific individual needs. I've worked with children with many different exceptionalities and disabilities and disorders, but never one that was fully blind. When you're looking at any child with a disability, we talked in the first session about least restrictive environments. We have talked over and over about consistent routines, but just to also, as an educator, know what resources are out there. Google, Pinterest, all of these types of search engines and formats are out there that can help you to implement different things within your classroom. So I encourage you, as you get a child with a disability or an exceptionality or just individually different, that you get online and do research to be able to have resources available to you. When you think of visual impairments, we'll jump back to visual impairments, there are potential indicators for concern, and that's on your milestone list. So are the children squinting? Are they closing their eyes? Are they holding objects close to their face? Are they blinking excessively? Are they rubbing their eyes? Are they complaining of blurriness? Do their eyes look crossed? All of those things are indicators that would make you want to speak to the parent, ask them to take the child to the pediatrician or the ophthalmologist to get, those kind of resources. And then find out for each disability, whether it's visual impairments or whatever it is, what kind of supports for therapy are available so that you can help educate your parents in this area. Because when a parent has a child with an exceptionality, with a disability, with a disorder, they are so overwhelmed that just knowing, hey, this is out there, you should check into this. Here's a pamphlet, or here's a website, is just such a special gift to them. Thinking about strategies within your classroom when it comes to children with visual impairments, you want to be able to have assistive technology skills, screen readers, if they're totally blind, Braille in your classroom. You want to let the children learn how to navigate the environment, and then you can't move the environment around because you've taught them how to navigate the environment. If it changes, then you have to reteach them how to navigate the environment. You need to keep the environment clean and organized. Routine is going to be your greatest gift, so that you don't leave something on the floor where they can trip over. Have high expectations for children with visual impairments and all children, because they can achieve. It's just a different way to get there. Facilitate friendships between children who are typically developing and children who are atypically developing. And then always make sure that you've got peer pals, that you've got one child in the classroom who can be helpful to the other child, who can help that child navigate the world around them in a way that builds good social skills and camaraderie. When you're modifying your environment for children who are visually impaired, there was a lot of suggestions. Of course, we do labels. You know, we label things in the classroom. For multicultural, we do it in multiple languages, but there's no reason we can't do it in Braille too. Make sure that you provide objects that are brightly colored on high contrast backgrounds. You don't want to overstimulate, but you want to make sure that it pops, that it's there. Add textures to finger paints. Create textured letters so the children can trace those letters and feel the different letters. Make sure that you remember that real objects are better than plastic objects. So all the little plastic pots and pans, it's better if you use the material that pots and pans are made out of if you have a child who is vision impaired. And ultimately, if you believe in Maria Montessori's theories, you would do that for all of your materials. Make sure that your environment is tactile as well as visually desirable and with colors. One of the things that I saw done in a classroom for a child who did have some vision impairment but was not blind was that everywhere there was a step, they put an orange piece of tape so that the child could see that at that point they had to step down. So lots of different little techniques that you can utilize within your own classroom that would be beneficial. 10 tips that you want to use in your classroom as an educator for children who are visually impaired would be always use the children's names. I would say for all children, they want to hear their names. You are painting a picture of what's going on with your words for the children. Remember to use full sentences. Let your words paint the environment. Don't gesture or verbalize, but to say them. It's okay to use words that reference sight, like let's look at that, or do you see that? Because their definition of see and your definition of see or look are different because they see with their hands. Or with other senses. Avoid asking the child, can you see this? Ask them things like, can you define this? So if you want to say, look at this, let's touch this and see this, that's great. But to go a step further then would to be able to say, tell me about it, explain it to me, because then you're teaching them how to use their words. Correct seating is crucial when you have a child with any kind of visual issues. Always make sure the light's behind them and not in front of them. Because for children who are visually impaired, the light at them may be painful or distracting or prevent them from being able to see what they can see. There are many different, and you remember I told you the internet has lots of resources. So like I looked up just resources on this because this is an area that I'm not as strong in. And so just Google real quick, best resources for preschool teachers, children who are with visual impairments. And I got the Perkins School for the Blind, American Foundation for the Blind, the National Federation for the Blind, the Hadley Institute for the Blind and Visually Impaired, Vision Aware, Brookshare, which will send you, you can check out Braille books, the Braille Institute. There's so many free resources as I was going through these resources. So, you know, what it comes down to is that we can give that to you as educators in the college setting all day long, but unless you know how to go and look for it yourself, you're not going to truly use it in the way that you would use it if we just sent you an email and said, here's a resource, and then you never open it. So that's something that I want you to do, is to learn how to advocate for your children. Hearing impaired. Well, I talked a little bit about hearing impaired, but when you're talking about children who are deaf or hard of hearing, you have to really remember that early intervention is something that is totally important. You want to remember that there are lots of different reasons for hearing impairment. You've got congenital loss, premature birth, infections, history of deafness, then Down syndrome specifically has children with hearing impairments. It may be an accidental cause like ear infection, fluid behind the eardrum, head injuries, childhood illness, repeated exposure to loud sounds. My daughter has a hearing impairment. She is the one who is dyslexic. She's my oldest. And she got it from swimming in a swimming pool where a baby was in the pool and pooped and didn't have a baby diaper on. And she got something called Pseudomonas. And that particular bacteria eats the eardrum completely out. And she's had to have her eardrum replaced 5 times in her life and has a hearing loss in that side of her ear. So there's lots of different things that can cause hearing loss. A lot of times she had ADHD, but it was indifferent. So she was the little one who sat in the corner, who looked outside the window, who acted like she wasn't paying attention to anything, was not a problem, was not identified until in the 3rd grade, because the teachers just thought she was the most precious, sweetest thing in the world, because she didn't argue, because she couldn't hardly hear them, and she didn't cause any behavior problems. Because she was sitting over in the corner watching butterflies out the window. So, we don't want to, as educators, just focus on the children who cause behavior issues. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of the children in our classrooms. Again, milestones, knowing the milestones, being able to present that to your parents is so incredibly important. There are things like cochlear implants, FM systems. When I talked about the mic that I had on, that particular mic was hooked to his cochlear implant, his hearing aid, and he was able to then hear me, and all the other sounds didn't overwhelm him. Sign language is a way to deal with children with hearing impairments. A lot of classrooms do sign. I have my grandson who was on the spectrum signed. Now she's had another child who is typically developing, but she'll sign for everything that she wants as well. So as we look at ways to speak, we need to remember that it's not just the traditional way, that we can use a combination of methods of speaking with our children. I just want to really stress the need to collaborate with other professionals, how crucial it is in all settings within your classroom, for every child in your classroom, that you want to have a group of people who are in that child's village. It's not your village, it's each individual child's village that you are ministering to or educating. And you're a part of that child's village. When you think about strategies, especially with children who have hearing issues, you want to make sure that only one person is talking at a time. You want to make sure that you get the attention of the child when speaking to them, that activities are hands-on. We are a multi-sensory person. Some of us learn better through different ways. So you want to make sure that it's not all rote learning, that it's not all memorization, that you're doing it in different ways. One of the examples I use in one of my classes is if I'm going to learn about an apple, seeing it on a piece of paper, is not necessarily, I can see the apple on the paper, but if I'm touching it, if I'm smelling it, if I'm tasting it, I'm going to learn a lot more about that apple. So we want to make sure that we are being multisensory in our educational process. We want to check the acoustics of the classroom, make sure that we've got softness in there to take some of those extra sounds out. And then just remember that whenever you are in a point where you're frustrated or you don't know what to do, to go ahead and utilize resources that are out there, that are available to you, to utilize the resources of the specialists that come into your classrooms. Our time is almost up, and we didn't get to physical disabilities, but that's okay because we're going to catch that one on the next time. What I ask you to do is to think about any specialists that come into your classroom. Think about how they come in. You're interacting with your children, so you can say hello and greet them, but then they take their child and they work with them, and then they bring the child back. You're still teaching your children, so you don't have time to stop what you're doing to have a conversation with that specialist. So one of the things I encourage that you do is to get a notebook and to have that specialist write down what they did and what you can do in the classroom to help support what they did. And it only has to be a small amount. And then you've got some understanding of what challenges that you have. And when you have a challenge where in the classroom with a specific behavior that's related to the disability or to the exceptionality or to the need of the child, that you write down a note for the therapist. Hey, I'm having trouble with this. What do you suggest? See, it's all about being a community and collaborating. And that is the way that you as an educator are going to be supported. Working with children is a wonderful gift. And I'm so glad you chose that profession. Remember, take care of yourself, take care of your children, and always learn, because to educate, you must be educated. Thank you so very much. I will see you in 2 weeks. If you need me, email me.